I am very glad to see the Prime Minister restored to his vigor, and to learn that he has been recuperated by his rest, and also, as we hear, rejuvenated. It has been my fortune to have ups and downs in my political relations with him, the downs, on the whole, predominating perhaps, but at any rate we have always preserved agreeable personal relations, which, so far as I am concerned, are greatly valued. I am sure he would not wish in his conduct of public affairs that there should be any shrinking from putting the real issues of criticism which arise, and I shall certainly proceed in that sense. My right honorable friend has had all the power for a good many years, and therefore there rests upon him inevitably the main responsibility for everything that has been done or not done, and also the responsibility for what is to be done or not done now. So far as the heir is concerned, this responsibility was assumed by him in a very direct personal manner, even before he became Prime Minister. I must recall the words which he used in the debate on 8th March 1934, nearly 3 years ago. In answer to an appeal which I made to him, both publicly and privately, he said, "Any government of this country, a national government more than any, and this government will see to it that in air strength and air power this country shall no longer be in a position inferior to any country within striking distance of our shores." Well, sir, I accepted that solemn promise. Some of my friends, like Sir Edward Gregg and Captain Guest, wanted what the Minister for the Coordination of Defence, in another state of being, would have called further and better particulars. And they raised a debate after dinner, when the Prime Minister, then Lord President, came down to the House, and really showed less than his usual urbanity in chiding those members who had been venturing to doubt the intention of the government to make good in every respect the pledge which he had so solemnly given in the afternoon. I do not think that responsibility was ever more directly assumed in a more personal manner. The Prime Minister was not successful in discharging that task, and he admitted with manly candor a year later that he had been led into error upon the important question of the relative strength of the British and German air power. No doubt as a whole His Majesty's government were very slow in accepting the unwelcome fact of German re-armament. They still clung to the policy of one-sided disarmament. It was one of those experiments, we are told, which had to be, to use a vulgarism, tried out, just as the experiments of non-military sanctions against Italy had to be tried out. Both experiments have now been tried out, and ministers are accustomed to plume themselves upon the very clear results of those experiments. They are held to prove conclusively that the policies subjected to the experiments were all wrong, utterly foolish, and should never be used again, and the very same men who were foremost in urging those experiments are now foremost in proclaiming and denouncing the fallacies upon which they were based. They have bought their knowledge, they have bought it dear, they have bought it at our expense, but at any rate let us be duly thankful that they now at last possess it. In July 1935, before the general election, there was a very strong movement in this House in favor of the appointment of a minister to concert the action of the three fighting services. Moreover, at that time, the departments of state were all engaged in drawing up the large schemes of rearmament in all branches, which have been laid before us in the white paper, and upon which we are now engaged. One would have thought that that was the time when this new minister or coordinator was most necessary. He was not, however, in fact appointed until nearly 9 months later, in March 1936. No explanation has yet been given to us why these 9 months were wasted before the taking of what is now an admittedly necessary measure. The Prime Minister dilated the other night, no doubt very properly, on the great advantages which had flowed from the appointment of the Minister for the Coordination of Defence. The re-argument used to show how useful has been the work which he has done accuses the failure to appoint him 9 months earlier, when inestimable benefits would have accrued to us by the saving of this long period. When at last in March, after all the delays, the Prime Minister eventually made the appointment, the arrangement of duties was so ill-conceived that no man could possibly discharge them with efficiency, or even make a speech about them without embarrassment. I have repeatedly pointed out the obvious mistake in organization of jumbling together and practically everyone in the House has agreed upon this. The functions of defense with those of a Minister of Supply. The proper organization, let me repeat, is 4 departments: the Navy, the Army, the Air, and the Ministry of Supply. The Minister for the Coordination of Defense over the 4, exercising a general supervision, concerning their actions and assigning the high priorities of manufacture in relation to some comprehensive strategic conception. The House is familiar with the many requests and arguments which have been made to the government to create a Ministry of Supply. These arguments have received powerful reinforcement from another angle in the report of the Royal Commission on Arms Manufacture. The first work of this new Parliament, and the first work of the Minister for the Coordination of Defense, if he had known as much about the subject when he was appointed as he does now, would have been to set up a Ministry of Supply, which should, step by step, have taken over the whole business of the design and manufacture of all the supplies needed by the Air Force and the Army, and everything needed for the Navy, except warships, heavy ordnance, torpedoes, and 1 or 2 ancillaries. All the rest of the industries of Britain should have been surveyed from a general integral standpoint, and all existing resources utilized so far as was necessary to execute the program. The Minister for the Coordination of Defense has argued as usual against the Ministry of Supply. The arguments which he used were weighty and even ponderous. It would disturb and delay existing programs. It would do more harm than good. It would upset the life and industry of the country. It would destroy the export trade and demoralize finance at the moment when it was most needed. It would turn this country into one vast munitions camp. Certainly these are massive arguments. If they are true, one would have thought that they would carry conviction to any man who accepted them. But then my right honorable friend went on somewhat surprisingly to say, the decision is not final. It will be reviewed again in a few weeks. What will you know in a few weeks about this matter that you do not know now, that you ought not to have known a year ago, and have not been told any time in the last 6 months? What is going to happen in the next few weeks which will invalidate all these magnificent arguments by which you have been overwhelmed, and suddenly make it worth your while to paralyze the export trade, to destroy the finances, and to turn the country into a great munitions camp? The First Lord of the Admiralty, in his speech the other night, went even further. He said, "We are always reviewing the position. Everything," he assured us, "is entirely fluid." I am sure that that is true. Anyone can see what the position is. The government simply cannot make up their minds, but they cannot get the Prime Minister to make up his mind. So they go on in strange paradox, decided only to be undecided, resolved to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, all-powerful to be impotent. So we go on preparing more months and years, precious perhaps, vital to the greatness of Britain, for the locusts to eat. They will say to me, "Minister of Supply is not necessary, for all is going well." I deny it. The position is satisfactory. It is not true. All is proceeding according to plan. We know what that means. Let me come to the Territorial Army. In March of this year, I stigmatized a sentence in the War Office memorandum about the Territorial Army, in which it was said the equipment of the Territorials could not be undertaken until that of the regular army had been completed. What has been done about all that? It is certain the evils are not yet removed. I agree wholeheartedly with all that was said by Lord Winterton the other day about the Army and the Territorial Force. When I think how these young men who join the Territorials come forward, almost alone in the population, and take on a liability to serve anywhere in any part of the world, not even with a guarantee to serve in their own units, come forward in spite of every conceivable deterrent, come forward 140,000 of them, although they are still not up to strength, and then find that the government does not take their efforts seriously enough even to equip and arm them properly. I marvel at their patriotism. It is a marvel. It is also a glory, but a glory we have no right to profit by unless we can secure proper and efficient equipment for them. A friend of mine the other day saw a number of persons engaged in peculiar evolutions, genuflections, and gestures in the neighborhood of London. His curiosity was excited. He wondered whether it was some novel form of gymnastics or a new religion. There are new religions which are very popular in some countries nowadays, or whether they were a party of lunatics out for an airing. On approaching closer, he learned that they were a searchlight company of London territorials, who were doing their exercises as well as they could without having the searchlights. Yet we are told there is no need for a ministry of supply. In the maneuvers of the regular army, many of the most important new weapons have to be represented by flags and discs. When we remember how small our land forces are, altogether only a few 100,000 men, it seems incredible that the very flexible industry of Britain, if properly handled, could not supply them with their modest requirements. In Italy, whose industry is so much smaller, whose wealth and credit are a small fraction of this country's, a dictator is able to boast that he has bayonets and equipment for 8 million men. Have the figure if you like, and the moral remains equally cogent. The army lacks almost every weapon which is required for the latest form of modern war. Where are the anti-tank guns? Where are the short-distance wireless sets? Where are the field anti-aircraft guns against low-flying armored airplanes? We want to know how it is that this country, with its enormous motoring and motor bicycling public, is not able to have strong mechanized divisions, both regular and territorial. Surely when so much of the interest and taste of our youth is moving in those mechanical channels, and when the horse is receding with the days of chivalry into the past, it ought to be possible to create an army of the size we want, fully up to strength, and mechanized to the highest degree. Look at the tank corps. The tank was a British invention. This idea, which has revolutionized the conditions of modern war, was a British idea, forced on the War Office by outsiders. Let me say that they would have just as hard work today to force a new idea on it. I speak from what I know. During the war, we had almost a monopoly, let alone the leadership in tank warfare, and for several years afterward, we held the foremost place. To England, all eyes were turned. All that has gone now. Nothing has been done in the years that the Locust had eaten to equip the tank corps with new machines. The medium tank, which they possess, which in its day was the best in the world, is now long obsolete. Not only in numbers, for there we have never tried to compete with other countries, but in quality. These British weapons are now surpassed by those of Germany, Russia, Italy, and the United States. All the shell plants and gun plants in the Army, apart from the very small peacetime services, are in an elementary stage. A very long period must intervene before any effectual flow of munitions can be expected, even for the small forces of which we dispose. Still, we are told there is no necessity for a ministry of supply, no emergency which should induce us to impinge on the normal course of trade. If we go on like this, and I do not see what power can prevent us from going on like this, someday there may be a terrible reckoning, and those who take the responsibility so entirely upon themselves are either of a hardy disposition, or they are incapable of foreseeing the possibilities which may arise. Now I come to the greatest matter of all, the air. We received on Tuesday night from the First Lord of the Admiralty the assurance that there is no foundation whatever for the statement that we are vastly behindhand with our Air Force program. It is clear from his words that we are behindhand. The only question is, what meaning does the First Lord attach to the word vastly? He also used the expression about the progress of air expansion that it was not unsatisfactory. One does not know what his standard is. His standards change from time to time. In that speech of the 11th of September about the League of Nations, there was one standard, and in the Horolavo Pact, there was clearly another. In August last, some of us went in a deputation to the Prime Minister in order to express the anxieties which we felt about national defense, and to make a number of statements which we preferred not to be forced to make in public. I personally made a statement on the state of the Air Force, to the preparation of which I had devoted several weeks, and which, I am sorry to say, took an hour to read. My right honorable friend, the Prime Minister, listened with his customary exemplary patience. I think I told him beforehand that he is a good listener, and perhaps he will retort that he learned to be when I was his colleague. At any rate, he listened with patience, and that is always something. During the 3 months that have passed since then, I have checked those facts again in the light of current events and later knowledge. And were it not that foreign ears listen to all that is said here, or if we were in secret session, I would repeat my statement here. And even if only one half were true, I am sure the House would consider that a very grave state of emergency existed. And also, I regret to say, a state of things from which a certain suspicion of mismanagement cannot be excluded. I'm not going into any of those details. I make it a rule, as far as I possibly can, to say nothing in this House on matters which I am not sure are already known to the general staffs of foreign countries. There is one statement of very great importance which the Minister for the Coordination of Defense made in his speech on Tuesday. He said, "The process of building up squadrons and forming new training units and skeletal squadrons is familiar to everybody connected with the Air Force. The number of squadrons in present circumstances at home today is 80, and that figure includes 16 auxiliary squadrons, but excludes the Fleet Air Arm, and of course does not include the squadrons abroad. From that figure and the reservations by which it was prefaced, it is possible for the House and also for foreign countries to deduce pretty accurately the progress of our Air Force expansion. I feel therefore at liberty to comment on it. Parliament was promised a total of 71 new squadrons, making a total of 124 squadrons in the Home Defense Force by 31st March 1937. This was thought to be the minimum compatible with our safety. At the end of the last financial year, our strength was 53 squadrons, including auxiliary squadrons. Therefore, in the 32 weeks which have passed since the financial year began, we have added 28 squadrons, that is to say, less than one new squadron each week. In order to make the progress which Parliament was promised, in order to maintain the program which was put forward as the minimum, we shall have to add 43 squadrons in the remaining 20 weeks, or over 2 squadrons a week. The rate at which new squadrons will have to be formed from now till the end of March will have to be nearly 3 times as fast as hitherto. Do not propose to analyze the composition of the 80 squadrons we now have, but the Minister, in his speech, used the suggestive expression, skeletal squadrons, applying at least to a portion of them. But even if every one of the 80 squadrons had an average strength of 12 airplanes, each fitted with war equipment, and the reserves upon which my right honorable friend dwelt, we should only have a total of 960 first-line home defense aircraft. What is the comparable German strength? I'm not going to give an estimate and say that the Germans have not got more than a certain number, but I will take it upon myself to say that they most certainly at this moment have not got less than a certain number. Most certainly they have not got less than 1,500 first-line airplanes, comprised in not less than 130 or 140 squadrons, including auxiliary squadrons. It must also be remembered that Germany has not got in its squadrons any machine, design and construction of which is more than 3 years old. It must also be remembered that Germany has specialized in long-distance bombing airplanes, and that her preponderance in that respect is far greater than any of these figures would suggest. We were promised most solemnly by the government that air parity with Germany would be maintained by the Home Defense Forces. At the present time, putting everything at the very best, we are, upon the figures given by the Minister for the Coordination of Defense, only about 2/3 as strong as the German Air Force, assuming that I am not very much understating their present strength. How then does the First Lord of the Admiralty think it right to say, "On the whole, our forecast of the strength of other air forces proves to be accurate. On the other hand, our own estimates have also proved to be accurate. I'm authorized to say that the position is satisfactory." I simply cannot understand it. Perhaps the Prime Minister will explain the position. I should like to remind the House that I have made no revelation affecting this country, and that I have introduced no new fact in our air defense which does not arise from the figures given by the Minister and from the official estimates that have been published. What ought we to do? I know of only one way in which this matter can be carried further. The House ought to demand a parliamentary inquiry. It ought to appoint 6, 7, or 8 independent members, responsible, experienced, discreet members, who have some acquaintance with these matters and are representative of all parties. The to interview ministers and to find out what are, in fact, the answers to a series of questions, then to make a brief report to the House, whether of reassurance or of suggestion for remedying the shortcomings. That, I think, is what any parliament worthy of the name would do in these circumstances. Parliaments of the past days, in which the greatness of our country was building, would never have hesitated. They would have felt they could not discharge their duty to their constituents if they did not satisfy themselves that the safety of the country was being effectively maintained. The French Parliament, through its committees, has very wide and deep knowledge of the state of national defense, and I am not aware that their secrets leak out in any exceptional way. There is no reason why our secrets should leak out in any exceptional way. It is because so many members of the French Parliament are associated in one way or another with the progress of the national defense that the French government were induced to supply, 6 years ago, upwards of £60 million to construct the national line of fortifications, when our government was assuring them that wars were over and that France must not lag behind Britain in her disarmament. Even now I hope that members of the House of Commons will rise above considerations of party discipline and will insist upon knowing where we stand in a matter which affects our liberties and our lives. I should have thought that the government, and above all the Prime Minister, whose load is so heavy, would have welcomed such a suggestion. Owing to past neglect, in the face of the plainest warnings, we have now entered upon a period of danger greater than has befallen Britain since the U-boat campaign was crushed. Perhaps, indeed, it is a more grievous period than that, because at that time at least we were possessed of the means of securing ourselves and of defeating that campaign. Now we have no such assurance. The error of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays, is coming to its close. In its place we are entering a period of consequences. We have entered a period in which, for more than a year, or a year and a half, the considerable preparations which are now on foot in Britain will not, as the Minister clearly showed, yield results which can be effective in actual fighting strength. While during this very period, Germany may well reach the culminating point of her gigantic military preparations, and be forced, by financial and economic stringency, to contemplate a sharp decline, or perhaps some other exit from her difficulties. It is this lamentable conjunction of events which seems to present the danger of Europe in its most disquieting form. We cannot avoid this period. We are in it now. Surely, if we can abridge it by even a few months, if we can shorten this period when the German army will begin to be so much larger than the French army, and before the British Air Force has come to play its complementary part, we may be the architects who build the peace of the world on a sure foundation. Two things, I confess, have staggered me after a long parliamentary experience in these debates. The first has been the dangers that have so swiftly come upon us in a few years, and have been transforming our position and the whole outlook of the world. Secondly, I have been staggered by the failure of the House of Commons to react effectively against those dangers. That, I am bound to say, I never expected. I never would have believed that we should have been allowed to go on getting into this plight month by month and year by year, and that even the government's own confessions of error would have produced no concentration of parliamentary opinion and force capable of lifting our efforts to the level of emergency. I say that unless the House resolves to find out the truth for itself, it will have committed an act of abdication of duty without parallel in its long history.